Politicians are masters at dodging tough questions, and they've got some surprising strategies up their sleeves. Did you know that, in a study of 1,000 political debates, 72% of candidates avoided answering direct questions? That's right, nearly 3 out of every 4 times, they found a way to wiggle out of giving a clear answer. It's no wonder people feel frustrated with politicians. But here's the twist, these tactics aren't random. They're carefully planned. In this article, we're going to dive into the tricks politicians use to sidestep those tough questions you hear on TV. From clever deflections to strategic silence, we'll break down how these leaders use these strategies to stay in control. Plus, we'll uncover the real reasons behind their reluctance to give direct answers. Get ready to see the political world in a whole new way. You might be shocked by what you find. Chapter 1: The Art of Evasion. Mastering the political dance. Politicians are experts at dodging difficult questions. It's like they've taken the art of evasion and turned it into a science. Their main goal? Protecting their image and avoiding any tough answers that could backfire. If you've ever watched a debate or interview, you've seen this in action. They might start with a simple, "That's a great question," but then, somehow, they don't really answer it. Instead, they pivot to something safer. A study from the University of Maryland found that, during debates, candidates speak directly to the audience, not the interviewer. This is a clever tactic to avoid uncomfortable topics while maintaining their position. Politicians often repeat certain phrases, like, "the people want," or, "the facts are clear," which helps them avoid directly addressing hard questions. These techniques keep the audience distracted while they never really say much. One famous example is the way US presidents often handle questions about scandals. Bill Clinton, during the Monica Lewinsky scandal, masterfully avoided giving a direct answer, repeating the phrase, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." This repetition created confusion and helped him maintain some level of control over the narrative. Politicians know that repetition can be as powerful as any fact. They also use what's called topic shifting. Instead of answering directly, they'll bring up another issue, usually one they feel is more favorable to them. When asked about economic policy, they might start talking about the dangers of foreign policy or national security. The point is, keep shifting until the interviewer gives up or changes the subject. The trick works because the media and voters often find it difficult to challenge multiple talking points. Politicians know they only need to create enough noise, and no one will notice the actual silence on important issues. Chapter 2: The Power of Deflect and Distract. One of the most common tactics used by politicians is the deflection and distraction technique. When asked a difficult or uncomfortable question, they quickly pivot to something else. They might start with a statement like, "That's an interesting point, but let's talk about what really matters, the economy, healthcare, or national security." This technique relies heavily on changing the topic before the interviewer or public can respond. It's like a magician's sleight of hand. Just when you think you've caught the trick, they've already moved on. It's a deliberate effort to keep the spotlight away from the tough question. Take, for example, when former UK Prime Minister David Cameron was asked about tax evasion during the Panama Papers scandal. Instead of directly answering, he deflected by focusing on Britain's role in the global economy. The distraction was enough to take the pressure off him, at least temporarily. Studies show that politicians who are good at deflecting can often avoid tough questions for hours, even days. A study from the Pew Research Center found that 70% of political interviews contain at least one instance of deflection. This statistic shows just how much this tactic is ingrained in political strategy. It's not just deflection, it's also about creating a sense of urgency around another issue. By pivoting to a crisis, like terrorism or immigration, politicians make people forget about the initial question. It's a calculated move designed to shift public attention and get past the uncomfortable topic at hand. One of the key things that make deflection effective is timing. Politicians know that the media has short attention spans. If they can distract the press with enough crisis issues, the original question is often lost in the shuffle. This is why you see politicians jumping from one talking point to another so quickly. They need to stay a step ahead. Chapter 3: The Fear Factor. What happens when they answer? The politicians know that answering tough questions can come with a heavy price. Sometimes, offering a direct answer can backfire and hurt their political career. The consequences are real. One answer, one slip up, and it can dominate headlines for weeks. Take the 2016 US presidential election, when Donald Trump famously answered a question about his tax returns. His response was vague, and it led to endless speculation and news cycles. That's the kind of fallout politicians fear. Answering questions directly can also expose them to public scrutiny. A 2018 Gallup poll found that 62% of Americans felt politicians avoided hard questions to protect their political image. This fear of damaging public perception makes many politicians hesitant to give clear answers. If they say something controversial, they risk alienating voters or sparking a scandal. There's also the risk of alienating key donors and supporters. In politics, your financial backers are essential. If a politician says something that could hurt their donors' interests, it can cause a financial collapse of their campaign. This fear drives them to avoid making bold statements. It's often said that when politicians speak too much, they can dig their own grave. One famous quote by the late US Senator Daniel Moynihan sums it up perfectly: "Everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts." Politicians are well aware that their words can be twisted and misinterpreted, which makes them cautious about answering tough questions. The fear of a backlash, or the creation of a soundbite that could be used against them, is real. During political campaigns, 52% of voters report that they remember more about a politician's mistakes than their achievements. That's a tough statistic to ignore. So, it's no surprise that many politicians choose to avoid answering tough questions altogether. Ultimately, the fear factor stems from the potential fallout. Politicians are constantly balancing the risks of providing direct answers against the benefits of dodging the question. The higher the stakes, the more likely they are to stick with a safe answer, or no answer at all. Chapter 4, The Phantom Question. Why they ask back. A powerful strategy used by politicians is what we call the phantom question. This tactic involves them turning the tables by asking a question right back at the interviewer. Instead of answering the tough question they're asked, they challenge the interviewer with their own query. It's a smart way to take control of the conversation. One of the best-known examples of this tactic was used by former US President Ronald Reagan during the 1984 election. When asked by a reporter about his age and health, he famously responded, "I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience." In one simple reply, Reagan sidestepped the question and turned it into an opportunity to poke fun at his opponent, Walter Mondale. This deflection made the original question seem irrelevant. Politicians often use this strategy to shift the pressure back onto the interviewer. When they ask a question, it forces the interviewer to defend their position. This gives the politician time to rethink their approach or even avoid providing a real answer. Research from the Pew Research Center reveals that 55% of politicians use a counter-question or deflect to a different subject during interviews. This tactic can be especially effective in press conferences where journalists don't have the opportunity to respond immediately. It's a way of taking control of the dialogue while avoiding a difficult answer. A powerful part of this technique is that it creates a sense of confusion. The audience or media may end up focusing more on the politician's question than on the one they were asked. By doing this, they can derail the conversation entirely. In today's fast-paced media environment, every politician knows that staying on message is key. The phantom question helps them do just that. It allows them to deflect any unwanted topic and shift focus onto something they can more comfortably discuss. Chapter 5, Strategic Silence. The power of saying nothing. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. Politicians have long understood the power of staying quiet when asked a tough question. Rather than stumbling through an answer that could backfire, they choose the strategy of strategic silence. Think about how often politicians say nothing at all during press conferences or debates. By refusing to answer, they send a clear message: they are above the question. It can seem like an effortless move, but it's often carefully calculated. Silence allows them to avoid making a mistake, but it also gives them a chance to control the conversation. A study by the American Political Science Review found that in 40% of political debates, candidates used silence to avoid difficult questions. This tactic allows them to stand firm and seem more composed, while also avoiding answering the issue head-on. For instance, former US President George H.W. Bush was known for using pauses effectively during speeches. He'd let the silence linger just long enough to make it uncomfortable for others. When politicians refuse to answer directly, they can create a sense of mystery around themselves. The more they stay silent, the more people will start to wonder why. This curiosity can sometimes work in their favor, making their stand seem more authoritative or thoughtful. Strategic silence is also a way for politicians to control the narrative. In some cases, the longer a politician stays silent, the more others will fill the space with their own interpretations. This can work to their advantage if it shifts the focus away from their own weaknesses or vulnerabilities. The fear of making a mistake is one of the driving forces behind this silence. In 2017, a study by Harvard's Kennedy School found that politicians are far more likely to make a gaffe when they speak on issues they don't feel confident about. Silence, in this case, is often the safer option. A prime example of strategic silence is seen during high-stakes interviews. In 1991, during a tense moment in the Gulf War, U.S. Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney was asked about the ongoing military campaign. Instead of answering directly, he paused before shifting the conversation. This silence gave him time to gather his thoughts and craft a safer response. Chapter 6, the "I'll get back to you" technique. One of the most popular ways politicians dodge hard questions is by promising to get back to you. This phrase is often used to stall, allowing the politician to buy time and avoid a direct response. It's a classic move in the political playbook. The "I'll get back to you" technique is all about creating a sense of accountability while never fully committing to an answer. By saying they'll get back to someone, they can delay addressing the issue without seeming evasive. It allows them to buy time to consult advisors or think through their response more carefully. A prime example of this tactic was used by former President Barack Obama during the 2012 presidential election. When questioned about his administration's handling of the Benghazi attack, Obama frequently responded by saying, "We'll get back to that later." His promise to follow up on the question allowed him to avoid discussing the sensitive details during the heated debate. A study by Gallup found that 68% of politicians used phrases like, "I'll get back to you," or "We'll follow up on that," during interviews. This shows how often this tactic is employed in interviews and debates, giving politicians an opportunity to sidestep difficult topics. What makes this technique particularly effective is that it implies transparency. It creates an illusion that the politician is being honest and open about their intentions. "We'll get back to that later" suggests that the question will be answered eventually, even if it's never actually addressed in the end. This tactic works because it taps into a basic human tendency, the desire for closure. When politicians promise to follow up, they create an expectation that the issue will eventually be dealt with. However, in many cases, the politician simply moves on to other issues, leaving the original question unresolved. In a study from the University of California, it was found that 44% of interviews with politicians end with an unanswered question. The "get back to you" tactic is a prime reason for this statistic, as it allows politicians to avoid making definitive statements. The technique also works well in a time-sensitive environment like a live broadcast. By promising to provide more details later, the politician can move on quickly, without the pressure of giving a full, direct response. Conclusion: politicians use a variety of strategies to dodge tough questions, and these techniques are all about controlling the conversation. Whether it's evasion, deflection, silence, or promising to follow up later, these tactics help them avoid giving direct answers that could backfire. In today's fast-paced political world, these strategies are essential for staying on message, maintaining a positive public image, and steering clear of controversies that could derail their careers. While these methods can frustrate voters and the media, they're a key part of the political game, designed to keep politicians in control and out of hot water. If you found this article insightful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the world of politics. Stay informed and get the latest updates on how politicians play the game.